I cheated on my husband of 10 years, and it saved my life. For over a decade, my life was a picture-perfect painting that everyone else admired. I was with Ben since we were 17. We were high school sweethearts, the couple that everyone pointed to as proof that true love existed. We did everything right. We went to the same college, got married in our early 20s, bought a charming little house with a picket fence, and even adopted a golden retriever named Gus. From the outside, we were the embodiment of the suburban dream. Our friends would often say things like, "I wish I had what you two have." And I would smile and nod, playing my part. But inside, I was suffocating. The beautiful painting was a forgery, and I was the only one who knew the colors were all wrong. Ben wasn't a bad man. He was kind, responsible, and a good provider. But somewhere along the way, he had stopped being a partner. Our relationship had devolved into a series of routines and responsibilities. Our conversations were no longer about our dreams or feelings, but about mortgage payments, grocery lists, and who was going to take Gus to the vet. He saw me not as a person, but as a component of the life he had built. I was the co-manager of Project Perfect Life. The silence was the worst part. We could sit in the same room for hours, him watching sports on TV and me reading a book, and not a single meaningful word would pass between us. The space between us on the sofa felt like a canyon. I tried, I really did. I would suggest date nights, but he was always too tired from work. I would try to start a deep conversation, and he would give one-word answers while scrolling through his phone. A few years ago, I got a significant promotion at my marketing firm. I came home bursting with excitement, ready to celebrate. When I told him, he looked up from his laptop for a brief moment and said, "That's great, honey. Maybe we can finally get the roof fixed." There was no hug, no "I'm so proud of you," no recognition of the months of hard work I had put in. My accomplishment was immediately translated into a household expense. I felt a piece of my soul just crumble away in that moment. I realized I wasn't married to a man, I was in a business partnership, where my only value was my contribution to our shared assets. I felt utterly invisible, like a ghost haunting the hallways of my own home. My laughter had faded, my hobbies were forgotten, and my identity had been completely absorbed into being Ben's wife. The loneliness was an ache so profound it felt physical, a constant weight on my chest. The change began subtly. I needed an outlet, something that was just for me. On a whim, I signed up for a weekly woodworking class at a local community center. I'd always been fascinated by the idea of creating something tangible with my own hands. The scent of sawdust and wood stain was intoxicating, a world away from my sterile, predictable life. And that's where I met Julian. He was the instructor, a man whose hands were calloused and stained, but whose eyes were bright with a passion I hadn't seen in anyone for years. He wasn't classically handsome like Ben, but he had a warmth that radiated from him. The first time he spoke to me was to compliment my work on a simple dovetail joint. "You have a natural feel for the wood," he said, his voice a low, gentle rumble. "You don't just see the lines, you see the story in the grain." It was such a simple comment, but it struck me like a lightning bolt. Someone saw me. He saw my effort, my potential, my passion. In the weeks that followed, our conversations grew. We'd talk after class about different types of wood, about art, about music, about dreams we had when we were younger. He listened with an intensity that made me feel like I was the only person in the world. He asked me questions about myself, things Ben hadn't asked in a decade. He laughed at my stupid jokes. He remembered that I liked my coffee with a little bit of cinnamon. Tiny, insignificant details that felt like a lifeline. He was seeing the real me, the person buried under years of neglect and routine. And he was slowly, carefully helping her find her way back to the surface. I knew it was dangerous. I knew where this path was leading, but for the first time in a very long time, I felt alive. And that feeling was more powerful than any guilt. The transition from an emotional connection to a physical one with Julian was less like a sudden fall and more like a slow, inevitable sunrise. Our weekly classes became the anchor of my existence, a secret space where I was more myself than I had been in years. The hours I spent in the workshop were the only time I felt truly present, my mind not clouded by the quiet hum of my own unhappiness. The conversations that began over splintered pieces of pine soon spilled out of the workshop. It started with us being the last to leave, tidying up our workstations side by side, our arms brushing occasionally in a way that sent a jolt through my dormant senses. Then it became grabbing a quick coffee before class, and soon that coffee turned into long dinners at a quiet diner after class, where we'd talk for hours. I told him about my job, about the passion I had for branding and creative strategy that I was never able to share with Ben. He, in turn, told me about his dream of one day opening his own custom furniture shop. He spoke with such fire and conviction, and as he did, he reignited a spark in me that I thought had been extinguished. He had this incredible way of listening, of remembering tiny details. I once casually mentioned that I loved the smell of rain on hot asphalt, and weeks later, he texted me a photo of a darkened street after a summer shower, with the caption, "Thinking of you." It was a small, almost insignificant gesture, but it felt monumental. Ben hadn't actively listened to me, let alone remembered a detail so trivial in years. My phone became a secret lifeline, a constant stream of connection to Julian that made the silence in my own home more bearable. One evening, I was having a particularly terrible week at work. My boss had taken credit for a campaign I'd spent months developing. I walked in the door, my body buzzing with a mixture of rage and despair, and found Ben on the couch scrolling through his phone. "Hey," I said, my voice tight, "you won't believe what happened today." He didn't look up. "One sec, babe." After another minute of silence as he finished watching a video, he finally turned his head. "What's up?" I explained the situation, the betrayal, the injustice. His response was exactly what I should have expected. "Well, did you document your work? You should send a formal email to HR to create a paper trail. It's the logical thing to do." He wasn't wrong, but his tone was that of a project manager solving a logistical issue, not a husband comforting his wife. There was no empathy, no "I'm sorry that happened," no anger on my behalf. I just deflated. "Yeah, I guess," I mumbled, and the conversation was over. He had already turned back to his phone. I stood in the middle of the living room, feeling the full, crushing weight of my invisibility. I didn't want a solution. I wanted to be heard. I quietly went to our bedroom, pulled out my phone, and texted Julian. His response was immediate. "He's an idiot for not seeing your talent. Forget him. You're brilliant. Come to the workshop." I drove there without a second thought, tears blurring the streetlights. The workshop was empty and smelled of cedar and sawdust, a scent that now felt like a sanctuary. He was there, sanding a beautiful cherry wood tabletop, the single overhead light casting a warm glow around him. He didn't say much at first. He just handed me a piece of sandpaper and a block of maple, and we worked in a comfortable silence. The rhythmic motion was meditative, and gradually, the tension in my shoulders began to ease. After a while, he stopped and turned to me. "You have this light in you," he softly, his eyes searching mine. "Don't let people like your boss or anyone else dim it." And in that moment, the carefully constructed dam I had built around my heart finally broke. Tears I didn't even know I was holding back streamed down my face. He stepped forward and wrapped his arms around me, holding me while I sobbed for the promotion Ben had dismissed, for the loneliness, for the person I had lost. When my tears subsided, I looked up at him, and the space between us was electric. He slowly leaned in and kissed me. It wasn't a kiss of frantic, illicit passion. It was a kiss of profound recognition, gentle and deep, that felt more like coming home than my actual house ever did. That night, being with him was a revelation. It was about being seen, wanted, and cherished. I felt beautiful and alive and whole. Driving home in the early hours of the morning, a strange calm washed over the guilt. I slipped into bed next to Ben. He hadn't even stirred. In the following weeks, I lived a double life. I was the dutiful wife at home, but I was also a vibrant, passionate woman who met her lover in secret. The lies were a constant, bitter taste in my mouth, but the alternative, going back to that gray, silent existence, was unthinkable. I started to change. I bought a red dress, a color Ben once called too loud, and felt powerful in it. My work improved because I was filled with a newfound confidence. One evening, Ben nearly caught me. He picked up my phone to use its flashlight, and a notification from Julian flashed across the screen. Can't stop thinking about last night. My heart leaped into my throat. Ben, thankfully, was focused on finding something he dropped and didn't see it. But the terror of that split second was a stark reminder of the fragile world I was building. The affair wasn't the sickness that was destroying my marriage, it was the medicine that was healing me from it. The marriage had been dead for years. Julian just gave me the courage to finally sign the death certificate. I knew this couldn't last, that this fragile bubble of happiness was bound to pop. But I also knew, with a certainty that settled deep in my bones, that I could never, ever go back to being invisible.
The fragile balance of my two lives was never meant to last. I was living on borrowed time, and the clock was ticking louder with each passing day. The end didn't come from a careless text or a discovered receipt. It came because, for the first time in years, Ben started to actually see me. My newfound happiness, which I thought I was concealing, was radiating from me in a way I couldn't control. It made him suspicious. The man who couldn't be bothered to ask about my day was suddenly an interrogator, his questions laced with a possessive edge I hadn't seen since we were teenagers. The final confrontation happened on a Tuesday. I had just come from a clandestine lunch with Julian, and I was still smiling about a joke he'd made. I walked into the kitchen and Ben was standing there, his arms crossed, his face a mask of cold fury. "You were supposed to be at a work lunch," he said, his voice dangerously level. "I called your office. They said you took a personal afternoon." My blood ran cold. It was the calculated move of a man who already knew the answer, a man setting a trap. I started to stammer out a lie about an appointment, but he cut me off. "Stop. Just stop lying for once. Who is he?" The question hung in the air, sucking all the oxygen from the room. And in that moment, I realized I was done. I was done with the lies, the sneaking around, the heavy exhaustion of pretending. Years of unspoken resentment, of feeling ignored and diminished, erupted from a place so deep inside me I barely recognized my own voice. "Who is he?" I repeated, my voice shaking with a sudden liberating rage. "He's the man who asks me how my day was and actually listens to the answer. He's the man who remembers I hate olives and that I wanted to be a painter when I was a kid. He's a man who looks at me like I'm a person, Ben, not just a part of the household inventory." Ben looked stunned, as if I'd slapped him. His anger morphed into wounded pride. "The inventory? I work 60 hours a week to give you this house, this life. I bought you a new car last year. Is none of that good enough for you?" He was shouting now, his face red. "You think a car is a substitute for a conversation?" I yelled back, tears of pure frustration streaming down my face. "You think a big house feels any less empty when you're completely alone in it? I was dying in this perfect life, Ben. I was a ghost, and you didn't even notice I was fading away." The confession finally tumbled out, raw and unfiltered. Yes, there is someone else, and being with him feels more honest than anything I felt in this house for the last 5 years. The silence that followed was more violent than the shouting. Ben's face crumpled, the anger replaced by a look of utter disbelief. It wasn't the look of a heartbroken husband, it was the look of a CEO whose company had just been declared bankrupt. "Get out," he whispered, his voice hoarse. "Just get your things and get out of my house." The words, which should have destroyed me, felt like a key turning in a lock. I walked to our bedroom in a daze, the room suddenly feeling like a stranger's. I pulled a duffel bag from the closet and started throwing in clothes at random. My hands were shaking as I packed, my eyes catching on the framed photos on the nightstand, us on our wedding day, smiling and impossibly young. I felt a pang of grief, not for the man in the living room, but for the boy he used to be and the girl who had believed in their forever. I had nowhere to go. Our friends were his friends first,
My family lived across the country. There was only one person I could call. I stepped into the bathroom and dialed Julian's number. "He knows," I whispered into the phone, my voice cracking. "He kicked me out." There was no hesitation on his end, no panic, just a calm, steady voice that cut through my fear. "Okay," he said softly, "where are you? Come to my place. Just drive. We'll figure everything out. I'm here." Hearing his voice, so solid and reassuring, solidified my choice. This wasn't just an escape anymore, it was a destination. I zipped up my bag, walked back into the living room, and placed my house key on the coffee table next to a pile of Ben's unopened mail. He wouldn't look at me. He just stared at the blank TV screen, a statue of a man amidst the ruins of a life he never truly understood. I didn't say goodbye. There was nothing left to say. I walked out the front door, the same door I had walked through as a bride 10 years ago, and closed it quietly behind me. As I got into my car and pulled away from the curb, I took one last look at the house in my rearview mirror, its windows glowing with a warm, deceptive light. I wasn't just leaving Ben, I was leaving the ghost of the woman I had been, the woman who had learned to survive on scraps of affection in a silent home. I had no idea what the future held, but for the first time in a decade, I felt the exhilarating, terrifying thrill of being completely and irrevocably free. The drive to Julian's apartment was a blur of tears and streetlights. I arrived on his doorstep with a single duffel bag and the entire wreckage of my life trailing behind me. His apartment wasn't like the house I had left. It was smaller, a little cluttered, filled with books and half-finished projects, but it was pulsing with life and warmth. When he opened the door, he didn't bombard me with questions or offer platitudes. He just looked at my tear-stained face, pulled me into a hug, and let me cry until I had nothing left. He made me tea and sat with me on his worn-out sofa while the sun came up, listening patiently as the whole story poured out of me in a jumbled, incoherent mess. He didn't tell me I was brave or that I did the right thing. He just listened, offering a quiet, solid presence that was more comforting than any words could have been. In that small, safe space, I finally allowed myself to shatter, knowing for the first time that there was someone there who would help me pick up the pieces. The weeks and months that followed were an ugly, necessary storm. The divorce was brutal. Ben, the man who had shown so little emotion in our marriage, fought me with a cold, calculated venom. Our life together was reduced to a list of assets on a legal document, and he argued over every single item, from the car he'd given me to a set of antique plates we'd inherited. It was clear he wasn't fighting for the items themselves, but for a way to punish me, to make my escape as costly as possible. The social fallout was just as painful. Our mutual friends, the people who had toasted us at our wedding, vanished. I received a few self-righteous text messages telling me how disappointed they were, how I had thrown away a perfect marriage for a fling. Each message was a small, sharp sting, a reminder that the life I had left was nothing but a facade that everyone but me had been happy to maintain. I was an outcast, and for a while, the loneliness felt immense. But in the midst of that chaos, I began to build something new. Julian was my rock, but he was also wise enough to know that I needed to stand on my own. He helped me find a small apartment of my own, a sunny little place with creaky floors and a view of a maple tree. The first night I spent there, surrounded by secondhand furniture and cardboard boxes, I didn't feel sad or scared. I felt a profound sense of ownership. For the first time, I had a space that was entirely mine. I painted the bedroom walls a deep, vibrant teal, a color Ben would have hated, and it felt like an act of revolution. My relationship with Julian evolved beyond the frantic, stolen moments of our affair. We learned to navigate the mundane realities of being a couple, disagreements over dinner, sharing anxieties about bills, celebrating small victories. One night, we had our first real argument. It was a stupid, trivial thing, but my body tensed, preparing for the inevitable shutdown, the cold silence I was so used to. Instead, Julian stopped, took a deep breath, and said, "Okay, I'm not hearing you. Tell me again what you're feeling." We talked, we listened, and we worked through it. That small moment of genuine communication was more intimate and more reassuring than a decade of manufactured peace with Ben. It's been 2 years since that night I walked out of my old life. Julian and I now live together in a slightly bigger apartment, filled with a mix of our books, his tools, and my half-finished pottery. It's not making us rich, but it's ours, built from a shared passion. Sometimes, when the workshop is quiet and I'm at the pottery wheel, my hands covered in clay, I think about the woman I used to be. I don't see a villain who broke her vows. I see a survivor who performed a desperate act of self-rescue. I acknowledge the pain I caused, the scorched earth I left behind. Cheating was a messy, destructive solution, but I don't regret it, because it was the only tool I had left to dismantle a life that was slowly, silently killing me. I don't know if Ben is happy, and I've learned that it's not my burden to carry. My happiness is no longer a performance for others. It's a quiet, steady flame that I nurture every day. The silence in my life now is not an absence of love or connection. It is the presence of a deep and abiding peace, a peace I had to destroy my entire world to find.